Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. I know that the current situation is really posing a phenomenal challenges to all of us. Staying at home, and a lot of people are losing their job, and there's a lot of financial pressure across the various families. People are trying to figure out how situation will change, and some of us also must have come to a feeling that the world is going to come to an end. So, under these circumstances, one has to be very stable and balanced and centered to the possible extent in order to negotiate this situation and come up with a victorious outcome. So, in the last 1800 years or so, looking back into the history, these kind of pandemic and phenomenal challenges to human being have been happening on a fairly repetitive manner. Only thing is that in the recent past, in less than 100 years, it has become more frequent, and then it is intensity is much bigger than what it used to be in the past. But the mankind has been trying to find out various means to improve our comforts, and the science has advanced more to improve our comfort and the so-called kind of feeling that human beings will have a sense of satisfaction. But unfortunately, the most important aspects of life has not been addressed by the so-called scientific advancements. So I was just listening to some of the famous speakers and the philosophers and spiritual masters. So one of the aspects that Eckhart Tolle was sharing yesterday when I was going through some of his video recordings is extending the topic that I spoke about some time back, that we are upset due to variety of reasons, and then some of the issues that we are facing is much more serious and difficult to negotiate. So I'm leaving those aspects apart for a moment. So there is a kind of internal mechanism by which we will be able to keep up our kind of a balance under these kind of circumstances. So the most important aspect is that our mind is always trying to look into something more gloomy, and then going to create a kind of a panic and fear and anxiety all the time. So most of the occasions the reality is not as frightening as our imagination of the reality. So if you probably must have studied little more in detail in the past sessions I have been talking about, that a situation is one independent aspect, and then how we are narrating the situation in our mind is another aspect. Invariably the situation is not that complicated. Many a times our narration or our description of our mind about the situation, which was really creating a more kind of a panic and fear and anxiety in us. So it's extremely important to appreciate that when we are separating the situation apart from the kind of a narration that goes on in our mind, we get a different kind of a clarity. So that means what is most important is how do we isolate the situation by stopping the various kind of a narration that goes on in our mind. When I say narration in our mind, many of you may be able to appreciate who have been listening to me, and then also such of those who started meditating. So human mind is always has got its own way of functioning. So as I spoke in some of the previous sessions, that dharma is nothing but the basic characteristics of any creation. So the dharma of the mind is always to put us into some kind of pain anxiety, fear, and so on and so forth. So, any little things happening in our life, the mind, which is the manifestation of our ego, is essentially trying to bring in some kind of explanation that the situation is going to be very pathetic and difficult to tackle, and so on. So, such of those who are living kind of a common life, who are unconscious about these aspects, they don't even come to know that they are unnecessarily taxing their own self by the mere interpretation of the situation than the reality. So, what is most important is that, for example, we are all now staying at home with a very restricted movement, and now almost 5 months or nearly about 6 months right now, that we are slowly getting used to this kind of a routine, and also trying to started liking it. In a fact, that earlier we were thinking that we have been put into a jail or something of that kind, but gradually we started getting accustomed to it, and then gradually we are now at this point in time probably started liking the way in which our life is going on. So maybe when the things are opening up and then we are free to move around everywhere like before, we are not too sure that whether we will be really liking them once again. So I remember one of the description of the Nazi camp, the concentration camp in the Hitler's regime. People were all put into gas chambers and tortured for many years, and such of those lived in the concentration camp. When the freedom was given and then Hitler was no more, they opened up the gate of the concentration camp, and the people were walking towards the gate and they were going back into the concentration camp, because by the time they have virtually become insane. Their torture has at some point in time has lost its significance. That means they don't know what is a freedom and what is a situation in a concentration camp. So that means the human mind gradually tries to figure out the ways and means of adjusting to the situation that it is put into. So in summary, the most important aspect I just wanted to share with you is the situation today. This is 7.8 billion human beings across this planet are going through in an identical manner. Probably the data shows that India is doing much better in this pandemic as compared to America in terms of the recovery or in terms of the number of people who lost their life and so on. So we are really made up of our Vedic DNA, which is really helping us to visualize the situation in an entirely different way. So I'm not advising you that everything should be taken as it comes and not to worry about it. But any amount of worry is not really going to take us anywhere. As I mentioned in the previous sessions, that worry is like sitting in a rocking chair. It will keep you busy, it will not take you anywhere. So going forward, I think my suggestion is to learn meditation and try to keep yourself engaged with the great masters. There are huge amount of resources are available in the YouTube, so you can go through them and then create a kind of a mindset by which you don't go through the narration of the unfolding future, but try to face the problem and try to find a solution for that if you can. Hope that this session has given you some perspective in terms of how we can negotiate the current situation. God bless you. I hope that everything will become all right very soon. Take care.